For 11 years, Inspector Rehan Vaid was untouchable. Every raid he called, every trafficker he took down, it never once went wrong. What he didn't know was that none of it was really his. Every tip came from a stranger on a cracked phone he could never trace. And for 3 years, that stranger wasn't helping him. He was building him, studying his face, his voice, the exact way he walked, so that one day, when the time came, Vaid wouldn't just take the fall, he'd be the perfect man to frame. He didn't find out until the day his own face showed up on the news, standing beside the very men he'd spent his whole career hunting. Before we get to that, let's go back to where it all started. The night an inspector with 11 good years walked into a briefing room, pinned a photo to a board, and trusted something he had absolutely no reason to. The first time it happened, nobody thought much of it. Inspector Rehan Vaid had spent 11 years on the narcotics unit, long enough to know exactly what an ordinary raid looked like. Weeks of surveillance, informants paid in cash and fear, warrants argued over for hours. That was the shape the work always took, right up until the night Vaid pinned a single photograph to the briefing room corkboard and told his team they were moving in 6 hours on a warehouse nobody had ever put under surveillance. 6 hours, sir. We haven't run a single pass on this address, Sergeant Osai said. We don't need to, Vaid replied and did not elaborate. They found 400 kilos of cocaine exactly where he said it would be, behind a false wall exactly where he said it would be, guarded by exactly the number of men he said would be guarding it. Osai just said, "Good instincts, sir," in the voice of a man who didn't quite believe his own sentence. Nobody asked how. It was a good night, and good nights didn't invite questions. Driving home at 4 in the morning, Vaid told himself this was simply 11 years of pattern recognition paying off. He wanted badly to believe it. It would be some time before he understood that wanting to believe something and actually believing it were two very different things. The second raid came 6 weeks later, harder to wave off. A shipment was moving through the port under a fish export license clean enough to fool customs twice over, and Vaid had known not just which container but which crate, down to the padlock combination. This time someone asked. Constable Dylan Ferreira, half joking, said, "You got a source inside the cartel itself, sir, because at this point I'm starting to think you're the one running it." Vaid gave him the same practiced, unreadable smile. "Instinct," he said. Everyone laughed. It was easier than the alternative. That night, alone in his apartment, he took out the cracked phone he'd been carrying for 4 months and looked at it a long time. He'd read every message so many times he could recite the addresses without looking. He told himself again that this was a government channel, that the tips couldn't be manufactured because the arrests always held up in court. What he didn't tell himself yet was the question forming underneath his certainty. If the intelligence was this good, why did it need him specifically? And why had it found him instead of anyone else on the unit? The third raid made the newspapers ask instead of the officers. A cartel accountant so careful he hadn't been photographed in 4 years was arrested at a safe house Vaid's unit had never staked out. A reporter, Alenka Moss, cornered him outside headquarters. "In 3 major operations this year, not one detail of your intelligence has failed. How does a man do that?" Vaid gave her the same answer: good intelligence work, pattern recognition, and the broadcast ran that night calling him the department's quiet miracle. He never mentioned the phone. He remembered the first message with total clarity. No carrier record, no location ping that held still, and when he'd finally worked up the nerve to ask who was on the other end, the answer arrived within a minute, calm and rehearsed. "Consider this a government channel, Inspector. Nobody you'll ever meet. Use what I give you. Don't waste time asking where it comes from." He should have taken it to Commissioner Ray's that first week. But the intelligence was flawless. Every tip put another trafficker behind bars, and somewhere in the space between his conscience and his conviction rate, he'd quietly decided a source this reliable wasn't a question he needed to ask twice. So he stopped asking. Nobody wants to interrogate a miracle while it's still working. It's only afterward that anyone asks what it cost. The months that followed were, in Vaid's own retelling later, the calmest of his career, and the most dangerous, Because calm is exactly the condition under which a man stops checking his own reflection for changes. He was promoted informally in every way that mattered. Osai deferred to him without being asked. Dylan started calling him boss. Commissioner Reyes poured him an expensive drink and said, not quite joking, "Whatever you're doing, Vaid, keep doing it. I'd rather not know the recipe as long as the results keep coming." Vaid drove home, turning that sentence over, permission dressed as a compliment, which meant permission for whoever was on the other end of the phone to keep using him exactly as they pleased. He told himself it was a quiet partnership between two parties who wanted the same outcome. He never asked, seriously, what the other party actually wanted. There were nights he almost did, staring at 6 months of coordinates typed in the same flat, patient hand, feeling something in his stomach standing very close to unease. He never let it in. 11 years of good instincts told him something was wrong, and 11 years of good instincts told him not to look too closely at something that was working. For a long time, the second instinct won. The message that came 4 months after the third raid was longer than the others: 12 containers. Port of Santos. Names attached to 3 of them, the Almeida family, the largest trafficking network left standing in the region, most of its decline his own doing. 12 containers wasn't a tip. It was an organization's entire operating capacity, handed to him gift-wrapped. Some tired part of him wondered just for a moment what exactly he was being used for. He called Osai that night, who asked the only question that mattered. "Sir, if this is real, why is it landing in your inbox and not through a warrant application from a source we can name in court?" "Because it's always landed this way," Vaid said, "and it's always been real." Nobody argued further. He went anyway. The raid was the biggest of his career. 12 containers, 400 kilos in the 4th alone, exactly as described. By morning, his face was on every channel, hailed as the biggest single blow ever struck against the Almeida network. Reyes shook his hand for the cameras. There was quiet talk of a promotion. For 3 weeks, Rehan Vaid was, by every visible measure, the most respected policeman in the country, not yet understanding that the instincts everyone credited him for had never once in 3 years actually belonged to him. Somewhere in the city, in an office he didn't know existed, a different kind of celebration was taking place, quieter and far more final. A craftsman doesn't keep his tools out longer than the work requires. A month later, he woke to a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. His face was on every channel again, but this time as one of the Almeida network's architects. Grainy footage played on a loop, him laughing with cartel leadership at a private dinner. A photograph, time-stamped 18 months earlier, of him accepting an envelope. A second video showing him walking calmly out of an Almeida safe house, like a man who belonged there. He didn't remember any of it. He had never in 11 years accepted an envelope from anyone. That physical certainty was the only thing keeping him upright while the world rearranged itself around a version of him he didn't recognize. By noon, he was suspended. Commissioner Reyes, who'd shaken his hand on camera 3 weeks earlier, didn't offer him coffee this time. "The footage is either real or it isn't," Reyes said, "and right now I don't know which." He asked, not unkindly, whether not remembering something was the same as it not having happened. Vaid didn't have an answer yet. What he had instead was the one thread nobody else knew existed, a blocked number, 3 years of engineered tips. He said nothing about it to Reyes. Not yet. That night, no longer an inspector, he typed a message to the number that had built his career and he now understood had very possibly just ended it. "Who are you? And what did you actually have me do?" The reply took 4 hours. "You were never told to do anything you didn't already want to do, Inspector. Every target was real. Every raid was clean. What happens to you now was always going to happen once you stopped being useful." He read it perhaps a dozen times. Not once you were caught. Not once you made a mistake. Useful as though 11 years, every raid, every conviction, had been building toward a single deliberate expiration date he'd never been told he was standing on. He didn't sleep for 2 nights. He thought of Osai's unanswered question, of Reyes' toast, of Dylan calling him boss, each memory rearranging itself into something far less flattering. Not achievements, but rungs on a ladder someone else had built. He had 3 days before the warrant would likely be signed. He spent the first simply sitting with the wreckage. By the second morning, the same something that had once walked into a briefing room on nothing but a stranger's word began slowly to reassemble into a different kind of certainty. If he'd been built for a purpose, he could at least choose what he built next. He started with the envelope photograph, the one detail small enough to examine properly. A forensic contact from his academy years, Priya Renner, agreed to check the metadata the newsroom never had, at real risk to her own contract. "If this is what I think it is," she said, "someone spent real money making sure it would never come up in a casual review." She was right. The image had been assembled, not captured. 2 photographs stitched together well enough to fool anyone not specifically looking for the seam. The safe house video took longer, and a favor he wasn't sure he could repay. A technician named Farid who ran the footage through detection software the department was supposed to use and hadn't. "Walks yours, postures yours. Even the scars yours," Farid said, pausing the frame. "Eyes move wrong, though. Wrong enough for something built to notice exactly one thing. A face that's been taught to move like a man's face by something that never once had to be that man. Someone had spent months, maybe longer, collecting enough of Vaid's real face and voice to teach a machine to wear it long before the 12 containers, long before the first message ever arrived. It had never been a government channel. It had been a leash. With nothing left to lose, Vaid went looking for the pattern instead of the source, not who sent the messages, but who benefited from everything they'd caused him to do. He spread 3 years of raids across Priya's kitchen table. "Each raid, laid end to end with the network I dismantled," he said, "tells a story I was too close to see. Beneath every fallen empire, Almeida, Bertoni, Cruz, a smaller, quieter operation had expanded into the space left behind, laundered clean enough that narcotics never connected the dots. Every empire I burned down," he said, "cleared ground for the same, smaller kingdom to grow into." Priya followed the thread to its end. And 18 months ago, that kingdom needed a face the public already trusted completely. Someone to be standing in the wreckage once it was time to take the fall for a war the real architect never had to fight himself. He hadn't been recruited. He'd been cultivated, chosen years in advance, studied closely enough to know exactly which targets would earn his trust and which convictions would make the department stop asking questions. "Your integrity was never a flaw in the plan," Priya said. "It was the plan. Nobody suspects the honest man. An honest one only had to be shown, convincingly enough, appearing to make a deal." He returned to Ray's with a folder far heavier than the one used against him. The stitched photograph opened at its seam, the synthetic footage broken down frame by frame. 3 years of timestamps lined up beside every raid and every smaller network that had quietly grown in its shadow. Ray's asked the same fair question as before, whether not remembering something was the same as it not happening. This time Vaid had an answer. "It isn't, but a man can prove what he did do. The only way through this is to find who built it and why, before they finish deciding what happens to me next." Ray studied the folder, then did the one thing Vaid hadn't expected. He picked up the phone, told someone to hold the warrant, and for the first time in 11 years asked Vaid not what he'd found, but what he needed. That night, for the last time, Vaid messaged the number that had built and then unbuilt his life. "I know what I was to you. Not an informant, not an asset. A face you were always going to need the day you decided the war was over. I found the seams. I found the pattern." The reply came faster than any before it, and for the first time it didn't sound rehearsed. "Then you also know what happens to the men who see the whole shape of it. You were useful because you never looked past the target in front of you. That's the only version of you that was ever safe. Then I suppose," he typed back, "I'm not safe anymore." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned the phone over, set it beside the folder Ray's had finally opened, and picked up the badge that had, an hour earlier, been placed back into his hand. Somewhere in the city, a number he'd trusted for 3 years went dark for good. And somewhere behind it, a kingdom that had grown fat in the shadow of every fire Vaid had ever lit was about to learn that the honest man it built to take the fall had finally stopped looking only at the target he'd been given. and started looking, at last, at the hand that had been aiming him the entire time.